Kwe, Gwanude, hello and welcome. Andali wisi wana hamukwasita na jeo panawapskewi. There are so many things that we can talk about today that I've been really kind of racking my brain about it. And so I've been off in another space for most of the day. So I've been trying to like reel myself back in the last half an hour so that I can be really present with you. So my name is Sherri Mitchell. I'm from the Penobscot Nation, Pazildandil Nobama Kawasusnil, Banawapskewi, Nagakakagus Nil Zibayik. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe in Zibayik. Nalita Haziu and Diane, I'm happy to be with you here this evening. And I want to thank Sabrina and I want to thank Carl for the lead work that brought me to have this conversation with you this evening. And so what I would like to do is enter into a common agreement with you this evening that we will engage in a conversation with one another. Have all kinds of opportunities to sit and to be a talking head. And what I would really like is to be able to engage with you, you know, eye to eye, breath to breath, heart to heart, in a way that allows for us to share with one another in meaningful ways. And so if we can start out together, you know, in the beginning here, just really recognizing that even though we're in this weird format where we're looking at each other in little boxes on a screen, we can really feel one another if we just take a moment to do so. So I'm going to invite you all to just, you know, take a breath with me. Close your eyes, take a breath with me. And feel your roots go down into the ground. Ground ourselves for our conversation with one another. And then I would invite you to just reach out from your heart space to one another until you can really feel a pulsing of that connection. Because what I've found is that there's no separation between time and space. There's no real distance. One of the lessons for me in this time of quarantine and COVID is that one of the greatest illusions that I talk about and teach about a lot is the illusion of separation. And when we get into this space and we're dancing with each other's energy, I can feel you. You can feel me, that whole notion of separation is a myth on more than just a physical and theoretical level, that it's really a myth in a physical level. And then we're starting to get into quantum physics, right? We're starting to understand the complexity of quantum entanglement when we understand those things. And so all of our Web of Life teachings are based on that understanding of quantum entanglement, that we are all born out of the same seed of life that was created when Kachiniwas, the sacred feminine, spoke into this pool of matter that was waiting to be formed, Ekchamundo, the sacred masculine. And all form was created and then set into motion. We all are born of that same seed of life. And then when we separated and we moved across the universe into our individual spaces, we maintained those connections even though we forgot about them because we were under this illusion of separation. So any matter that was once connected physically is always connected energetically is the underlying Reader's Digest version of quantum entanglement. And we are also understanding that from my perspective as a Skajinawiapid, like as an indigenous woman who was from this particular place, I also understand that we can never be disconnected spiritually. And so we're connected energetically. If all you believe in is science, we're connected spiritually beyond that. And so understanding those connections as we're left in this time of real compartmentalization. Look on the screen. There's real compartmentalization here in the way that we've been having to interact with one another. And so the great lesson for me in this time is, how do we make tangible, really visceral connections with others during this time of quarantine? And so as you're doing these types of things, I would invite you to reach out energetically, not in an intrusive or creepy way, but reach out energetically in a loving way, and connect with the people who you're engaging in these moments with, because we have this really rare opportunity to be together in ways that we've not been able to in the past, or not thought to be together in the past. We were able to, but we hadn't thought to be together like this so much. So I've been having conversations with people from all over the world. I would not have been able to talk to people in Mongolia, and then in New Zealand, and then in the UK and the United States and Canada and Central and South America within a 4-hour time period, with them seeing my face, had it not been for this experience that we're going through. And so I think that this really speaks to the knowledge that we have about transformational change, because we're being challenged in this moment to show up in ways that we haven't been asked to before, and to address rising challenges that are increasing in severity, with the underlying purpose of really getting our attention. And we're being asked to meet those things in a very specific way. And I think that from me, where I come from, we have been told that these things were coming for a very, very long time. Those of you who have read my book, the last section of the book is about living in a time of prophecy. And it talks about all of the ways that our elders and our ancestors prepared us for living in this time, prepared us for the things that were to come. We are entering into this time period of great challenge. We're entering into this time period that our elders and our ancestors foretold. And so even though we have been prepared for decades, and in some instances centuries, for this time, psychologically, we're not really ready for it. We're not really ready to turn and to face it in a way that allows us to engage it meaningfully. We're not ready to psychologically turn and to come face to face with the type of hatred that we've been seeing rise up. We're not psychologically ready to turn and to have a conversation with the spirit of the fires that are devastating the Pacific Northwest. We're not psychologically ready to deal with the anger and the frustration that's rising up within us, because we've worked so hard to cultivate peace within our lives. And so as we're moving through this time and we're feeling all of these things rising up within us, I like to envision they're rising up, moving out through this natural progression of energy flow, right? That toral activity, that they're moving up and out in order for our creative intelligence to rise up to meet this moment, for the wisdom at the core of our being to be able to come forward and to inform us how to be with one another during this very difficult time. And so I have been contacted by a lot of people who have told me, I'm so angry right now, and I haven't been this angry in my entire life. I'm just filled with all of this rage. And so, working with what's rising up, that we judge within ourselves, and then we judge outside of ourselves, the rising anger that we're feeling within us in response to what we're witnessing is a cycle that we're feeding, because energetically we're engaged in a dance with the outer and the inner. And so as we're moving through this process, understanding that allowing the natural flow of that movement without reacting to it, but allowing it to inform us is a space that we are being called to in this moment. And so I just wanted to start out to acknowledge that everybody's feeling angry to some degree about something right now. People are depressed people are anxious. You know, we're feeling like we're lacking the tools to meet this moment in a way that represents our best selves, because we're living in unprecedented times. We're living in times where we're perhaps facing scenarios that are similar to those of the past, but we're facing them while we're also meeting this moment of conscious evolution. We're in this point of evolutionary, shifting, this evolutionary leap, where we're all standing on the edge, we're holding hands, we're looking at this big chasm in front of us, and we're trying not to fall off the edge, right, and to descend. We're trying to elevate ourselves, and so we have to get the momentum of our swing for that leap just right, so that we can leap up instead of falling down. And we're all feeling the immense pressure of that in this moment. And I think that it's important for us as we come together in these moments, and we're talking about transformational change. We're talking about forces of violence rising up within us that we're having to manage. As we're thinking about how do we engage nonviolent action outside of ourselves, we're having to, how do we respond to ourselves without a sense of violence? Denial of aspects of our own being, severing ourselves from our true emotions is an act of violence against us. And so there's so much that we're learning during this time together that I think gives us this really rich soil to cultivate something that's really powerful and profound. I think that another challenge that people are facing in this moment is this feeling that we're moving backwards, that we're regressing. Have any of you been feeling like we're moving backwards and that we're regressing? I've talked too much today, so I just got off a board meeting before I joined you, so my throat's a little dry. I promise I'm not going to give you COVID through Zoom. This is an analogy that I use in my classes quite frequently that I think accurately depicts the moment that we're in. So if you're driving down the road, so envision you're driving down the road, and here's the tire. The tire, you know, it goes, and then it gets to that place where it hits the road. The rubber hits the road, right? And then you get squeezed underneath, and you're in that space between the tire and the road where you're getting squeezed and what feels like being pulled backwards, and then you're propelled forward. We're between the tire and the road right now. We're being squeezed in this friction point moment where we're feeling like we're being pulled backwards, but we're really being ready to be catapulted forward again. And so to me, that's an exciting thought, even though it's wrought with so much challenge and so much pain. There's so much pain rising to the surface right now on so many levels for so many people. And so as we're dealing with all of this birthing pain, right? I like to use birth metaphors as well as apparently driving metaphors when I'm talking. And one of the birth metaphors that I've been using in a class that I've been teaching on the wisdom of the Sacred Mother is to really recognize that there's this time in the midst of birth when the mother reaches what's called transition. And during this transition phase is when women often tell their significant others, if you ever touch me again, I'll kill you. You did this to me. And a lot of expletives are exchanged during this time period and transition of labor. It's this point of like full effacement right before pushing, where the mucus is dissolved to the point of it moving out of the way so that the mother can begin pushing. But there's this tiny moment in between there that can last for a long time when you're in the midst of it, where everything on you, like I swear to God, if you're a woman who's given birth, you know that even your hair of its own volition, without anything, pushes down. Like everything bears, And you have to resist that moment because it's not, the opening hasn't been fully formed yet. This is also an apt description of where we are. We're breathing through the discomfort of wanting to bear down, right? And to push through what's going on right now. But when we do that, we miss all of the opportunity for the fullness of opening that can happen in this moment. And then, we can also become bruised in ways that we hadn't expected or anticipated, which can actually delay our evolution, right? Our progression, our movement forward. And so really sitting with this challenge of this time, the pain, the discomfort, the urge to really move in ways that are very assertive, even aggressive, right now are against most of our instincts. So right now what we're doing is we're getting practice overriding our reptilian brain. We're getting an opportunity to evolve our consciousness. We're getting an opportunity to really consciously engage the moment and think about, okay, what is in the interest of our highest movement forward, our highest wisdom? What is in service to our greatest collective renegotiation of who we choose to be on Mother Earth? Because we have thus far made collective and common decisions to be harmful, even if we haven't consciously made those decisions. Through complacency and complicity, we have made decisions to be harmful. We are now seeing the impacts of that harm. And so there's a lot going on. Do you agree there's a lot going on right now? And that description of those few moments that I just gave is a snapshot that doesn't get into any of the complexity. And so then when we wade into the weeds and we get into the complexity of all of these issues that are rising up, there are myriad other things for us to contemplate and to consider. But if we can take ourselves from that microcosmic view of being in the weeds, and then shift back to the larger view of either being under the tire, if you prefer that metaphor, or being either the mother in transition of labor, or the new baby that's being born who's about to break into the light, who's being squeezed in the darkness and about to break into the light. Choose your metaphor and think about what is most meaningful to you about this moment that we're in. Because I think that the only way for us to really engage with the moment that we're in, for us to take a breath, put our roots in the grounds, fortify ourselves, and have the psychological preparedness, the emotional preparedness, the spiritual preparedness to turn and to directly face the times that we're living in, is necessary for us to move through this in a way that gets us to the place that we believe we want to be next. And so I am going to give you an opportunity to weigh in on how you would like us to proceed tonight. Do you want to just listen to me talk for a while longer? Do you want to have me give you a focused lecture on anything in particular? Do you want to just have a conversation with me where you can ask me about the time that we're living in? Because I would like to be able to be in conversation with you. So I'm going to just open it up. And Sabrina, are you moderating?
Folks have generally been really good about unmuting themselves and kind of popping in, and so I don't feel a particular need to moderate, but I'm happy to take questions if people would rather that I ask them. But also would love to just hear from folks directly.
Yeah. Anybody have a thought, idea, question, comment that you'd like to share?
Sherri, this is Carl. One of the things that particularly caught my attention in your book, Sacred Instructions, was the four things that you speak about in terms of sovereignty. And for me, those those were constructive program ideas for me. So at some point in the evening, I hope you would maybe address those in relationship to the idea of constructive program.
Yes. I would love to. And I think that, you know, what I talked about in building this community is really about constructive engagement with the time that we're living in. That we recognize that the way that we have been living is destructive to all life, and that we have to consciously choose to disengage from the systems that have been upholding the harm. And so in the book, I have 4 pillars that I talk about. I'm adding a new one right now, which is a land sovereignty program and reclaiming some of our traditional homelands and freeing it from the expectation of productivity in terms of profitability. And so the community that I'm building is based on these 4 principles, which are water sovereignty, food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, and educational sovereignty. And so when we look at the illusion that we live in a post-colonial era, and we start looking at the ways that our lives are controlled, we see that we are all continuing to be colonized. The control of our water by large corporations is colonization of the commons. The control of our food systems is colonization of the commons. The control of large-scale control of energy systems and energy structures rather than those that are small, based on the needs of the community itself and owned and operated by community members, that is colonization of the commons. The cattle drive nature of our educational system is colonization of our minds, colonization of the commons. And so when we start thinking about choosing to be sovereign, we have to look at those 4 pillars, because if somebody controls the water, they control us because we can't live without water. If somebody controls the food, they control us because we can't live without food. If somebody controls the energy that many people require to live, there are a lot of people who live in assisted living centers. There are a lot of people who are reliant upon certain medical equipment, but also anybody that lives in a northern tier area is reliant upon a certain form of heat that is dependent on some form of energy. Whether you're burning fire, you're tucked into some kind of gridded system. And so, and then when we think about education, teaching our children to not be creative thinkers, to not be critical thinkers, and to be obedient to systems of control, and to just memorize information that this system of control wants them to have, rather than actually teaching them how to think, teaching them how to learn, teaching them how to engage with the world with an open, curious mind that allows for the fostering of the rising of their own creative intelligence, that allows for them to question how and why systems work the way that they do. I had a very indulgent grandfather who allowed me to question everything. When I was just 7 years old, I had a lot of questions about why does this group that has a church on our res fight with this group who has a church on our res, because we're a traditional family, ceremonial family. And so, for a period of time, he took me to all of these different religious institutions so that I could understand what it was that they were teaching, and what people were thinking and how they were feeling about one another. So that I could try to formulate my own idea about that. He was encouraging me to be my own teacher. He was encouraging me to be a critical thinker. He was encouraging me to observe and to experience and to form a decision that was based on factual information or to draw an inference that was based on some form of evidence. And so I was very fortunate. You know, we didn't have a lot of money, but I had an indulgent grandfather, which is to me one of the best things that you can have in life is an indulgent grandfather. And so I have every intention of being an indulgent grandmother to my 2-year-old granddaughter. And so when we think about what's lacking in these systems, what's keeping us imprisoned, right? What's keeping us imprisoned? If you look at Steve Biko's work, he talks about the greatest weapon of the colonizer is the mind of the colonized, right? Like if we can start policing one another about what's expected of us and what we should be doing, and this is how we follow the rules, and we start criticizing and condemning and policing one another, rather than encouraging experimentation and exploration of these other potential methodologies that could actually allow us to break free from the shackles that we've been confined by, then we've already lost. And so I encourage everybody to start thinking about how can you build a community around you or engage the community that you have and start looking at these 4 pillars. Who controls your water and how do you take that out of the hands of that, you know, that corporation or that power structure and disseminate the control of that water throughout the community? How do you gain water sovereignty? How do you ensure that you as a human being have a right to life because you have a right to have access to clean drinking water? When a corporation who controls the majority of the water on the planet, when the CEO of that corporation says that human beings do not have a right to clean water without having to pay for it, what that corporation is telling us is that we don't have a right to live unless they determine we've paid enough for that right to live. And so that's really important for us to be paying attention to. And it's the same thing with our food, because the food is so toxic that's being moved through these systems that we actually don't have any control over our own well-being as a result of the food that we're eating, because our food is our medicine. Also, the production of food on the planet is one of the leading causes of climate change. It's one of the leading causes of environmental destruction. The agricultural industry is a huge, huge player in the destruction of our environment. And so when we have farmed out, there's a good metaphor for agricultural practices, when we have farmed out the control over our food, then we have allowed ourselves to be colonized. And I think that that's something that that is critically important, because our food is our medicine. And it's been demonstrated time and time and time again that with the rise of industrial agriculture, there has been a corresponding rise in disease amongst the population, and corresponding rise in the use of pharmaceuticals. I was just listening to a doctor who was talking about when she first started practicing medicine, she used to have time to have conversations with her patients, to learn about them as a whole person, and then to talk about what was going on with them, how it was unusual, what had changed, and really treat her as a whole person. And now she only is able to see somebody for 10 minutes. That's what the HMO allows, is for to be able to sit with somebody for 10 minutes. And in 10 minutes, you can't make a good decision about what somebody needs as a whole person to move toward wellness. All you have time to do is to write a prescription. And that scenario has been purposely created so that there is control over our well-being. So when we think about these things, the control over our water, the control over our food is the control over the well-being of our bodies. And so really looking at how do we find out where is, really think about it. Get yourself a notebook for each one of these things and do some homework. Find out who controls your water. Find out if there's a water cachement law on the books that prevents you from collecting rainwater in a barrel in your backyard. Because in most places there is a law on the books that prevents you from doing that because of prior appropriation. And all of the riparian rights, and we won't get into all of the legalities of that, but understanding what are the restrictive water laws in your area and how are those preventing you from being able to live your life in a way that's meaningful to you, for you to actually choose to have a less harmful life. You have to disentangle yourself from these systems, because these systems are designed in such a way that they create harm just by virtue of their being. And so if you start looking at those 4 pillars and start thinking about your water, your food, your energy, is your energy part of this large multinational conglomerate where the usage of those in your community is not considered? What's considered is maximum profitability of the conglomerate. There have been communities that have completely removed themselves from those grids, and they have created small, local community energy cooperatives that is only based on the needs of that community. And what happens when you do that is that the whole community begins to benefit from the engagement with these systems. When you start having ownership, collective ownership over the sources of your food, the production of your energy, the stewardship of your waters, when you start having an active role in engagement with those things, the way that you respond to life is different because you're not detached from the sources of your survival. And so the system has been designed to create detachment from the sources of our survival. If you ask most children in school where certain fruits and vegetables come from, they'll tell you the name of the grocery store. They don't have any idea where things come from. They don't have any idea if you can grow an avocado in their backyard or a mango in their backyard, or if it's climatologically impossible for that to happen. And so, we have lost our connection and our engagement with our local environments and the sources of our survival. And so, active engagement with that right now, I think is powerfully constructive. And one of the challenges, I think, for anybody that's involved in activism, and I don't know if you guys know Rivera's son. Rivera and I are good friends, and years ago she had me on her show, Occupy Radio, and then we did Love and Revolution together for a couple of years. And I remember the first time we had a conversation and we were talking, and she was talking about deconstructive activities and how, you collapse this pillar and the whole, and all of this, decay and destruction. And I said, so you're a conquest activist. She's like, wait a minute, what? What did you just call me? And then we got off the air and we ended up having hours-long conversation about, what does it mean to be a conquest activist? Are you engaging in acts of conquest as a means to achieving peace? And how are those things contradictory to one another? Are you trying to create transformational change by conquering some other who you see as being opposed to your ideology? And I think that's another area where we really have to engage in considering, do we want to be constructively engaged with the creation of a new way of being, or do we want to be destructive and engaged in acts of conquest so that we can feel like we are now back in a position of power? And it's just the perpetuation of a cycle. And so I'm going to stop there again, and I'm going to ask for more questions. So please don't be shy.
I just want to say thank you so much for the language of conquest activism. That's been a space for me that I haven't had the language for about what was bothering me about communities I had been in the past, or actions I'd participated in. Because they didn't feel healing, they felt competitive in this strange way. And then also thank you for the language of freeing the land from the expectation of productivity.
Yeah.
That, you know, I work in land preservation in Baltimore, and specifically a lot with forests. And I am often having conversations with people about people benefit from the forest because it is itself. Like it just, like it doesn't have to be something else, or I don't know. So anyway, like, and also that reminder about not putting expectations on the land. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's important if we want to break out of this paradigm, because the paradigm that we're operating under, this Lockean theory of property ownership, you know, goes back to John Locke saying that the land has no beneficial use unless the beneficial use is creating profitability. And so it has to be somehow producing something in order to be valuable. And that whole distorted separatist way of thinking, that you're not recognizing the inherent value of the land just in and of itself and its inherent right to exist unmolested. And you know, we also have that same expectation of ourselves. If you're not being productive at all, do you have value? And if we go back to 3000 BCE, the first product on the exchange market was the body of a woman, who was exchanged for land, or for land protection for the father. And so in the Wisdom of the Sacred Mother class that I've been teaching for the last month, one of the things I talk about is the story of Sedna. And Sedna is, it's an Inuit story that talks about this beautiful young woman who doesn't want to get married, and she's just not selecting a suitor to marry. And so she's getting a lot of pressure, and finally this being comes, this man shows up who promises the family all of these riches and protection if they can have Sedna. And so Sedna is married off to this being, and he takes her to his island, and there it reveals himself to be not even a human being, but this bird creature, and she's very unhappy, and she's trapped there, and there's no security, and there's no wealth or abundance in the place where he takes her to live. And to me, there are all of these lessons that are associated with Sedna, right? To me, the story of Sedna, because Sedna's father comes to visit and sees how unhappy his daughter is and that they've all been deceived, and tries to take Sedna back home. But these bird creatures all rise up and flap their wings, and they create this tumult in the water, and there's this huge storm that threatens to tip over the father's canoe and capsize him and kill him. And so in order to retain his safety, he again sacrifices his daughter by throwing her overboard. And she tries to hold on to the edge of the canoe, and he cuts off her fingers. And so then her fingers become these sea creatures that end up feeding and nourishing the people. And to me, Sedna is a cautionary tale about sacrificing your daughter for a false sense of security and protection, or for a false sense of wealth. And how do we do that to ourselves? How do we become Sedna's father, right? Because Sedna is sacrificed for the wealth and protection of the father. And but how do we transform ourselves into Sedna? How do we sell ourselves in order for our own false sense of wealth or advancement or protection? How do we sell ourselves for a sense of status? How do we cut parts of ourselves off in this process of selling ourselves? We're fragmenting and commodifying ourselves into different aspects that are saleable to different groups. How do we emerge fully embodied to share the gifts that we have at this time if we're selling aspects of ourselves off? And so, there's so much for us to learn in this process that's connected to, this concept of freeing the land of its expectation of productivity. How do we free ourselves from the expectations that we've had upon ourselves and allow those expectations to fall to the side so that what's truly brilliant within us can rise up? Because we were all born for this time. We carry specific gifts with us that are designed specifically to help us to manage that evolutionary leap that we're on the verge of, right? That give us the collective momentum to make it to the other side, right? But we don't do that if we're all fragmented and we can't bring all of ourselves to the swing. And so we have to start looking at how do we commodify and commercialize our own selves and worry about showing up in ways that make us saleable goods. Because if we think about going back to our earliest memory, who were we for our mother? Who were we for our father? Who were we for our grandparents? Who were we for our least favorite teacher? And who were we for our favorite teacher? Who were we when we tried to get our first job? How did we present ourselves for that? When we were trying to get a date, right? Who did we become in order to get a date? And when we think about the language of that even when somebody's single, they say they're on the market. That there's this commercialization and capitalistic way that we view ourselves as either commodities or consumers. And if we want to be able to strip out of this system that has us in a chokehold right now, then we need to really start thinking about how do we break free from that control of our minds, that colonization of our minds? How do we break free from this distorted view of ourselves as being a commodity? And how do we shake off this expectation that we have to either be a commodity or a consumer? Because if we're not selling ourselves, what are we buying? And who's benefiting from that buying and that selling? And who is excluded from that process? And so the community that I'm building right now with Jukum Tultina is based on looking at a mothering economy. And these principles that are in the book called Alabizu and Mamabizu under the chapter on core cultural values. That you make sure that you have enough to live your life with dignity so that you can show up and offer the best of what you have. And then Alabizu is making sure that everyone in the community has that same opportunity to show up as their best selves because all of their basic needs are met. And then rather than getting into even a sharing economy or any type of exchange economy, people just do, what can I really give, and still be okay myself? Can I still have Mamabizu? Can I still have enough to live my life with dignity? And then what can I afford to give? The way that a loving mother would give to her children. And so I've set up all of these different, I almost just said a bad word. I almost said exchange. I've set up all of these networks where we're all contemplating that question. We're all creating different things. We're all growing different things. We're all offering different things. A network that goes all the way from Maine down to Alabama, where we're coordinating with one another in what it is that we're cultivating. And then we're making sure that we have enough Alabizu and Mamabizu in our individual selves and in our communities. And then we're looking at what is it that we have to share and to give freely without any expectation of return. Right? If we can all live that way, in the way that a loving mother would would look toward making sure that all of her children have enough, that they all have enough to be, to not only live, but to thrive. Then we could really start shifting. Instead, we're talking about, all of these different kinds of sharing economies. We're talking about time banks. We're talking about everything in relation to commerce and capitalism. And we're not thinking about kinship. We're not thinking about Pasilda and Alabama, the way that we live in harmonious relationship with one another, with our kin, with our extended kinship networks. And so Wajukum Toltina kinship community is all about thinking about things in that way. How do we think about things through the lens of the matriarch, the loving matriarch, who was responsible for holding the family together, who was the one who ensured that you knew who your cousin was, your fourth cousin on your mother's side and your fifth cousin on your father's side, and that you had a connection to those families. And for us, that extends to, I understand that the oak tree that's in my yard is my relative. I understand that I have a connection to the ash tree that dates back centuries. I have an understanding that as Penobscot, that the Penobscot River, the Penobscot land territory, and me as Penobscot are indistinguishable. We all rise up out of the same soil, so to speak. We all exist within the same space within the earth, and that we have this kinship relationship, this reciprocal sharing relationship with one another. And so all of those understandings become tied together when we really start shifting the way that we think about things like land ownership and the need for productivity and the need to be producing something in order to have value. So, yeah, thank you. Who else wants to share something or ask a question?
When you were speaking at the beginning of prophecy and stuff, it popped into my mind the story of Israelites in Egypt, that they were there for 400 years. And I've been learning a little bit about the 1619, and so that's 400 years of slavery in this culture. And when you talked about how we're being propelled forward, and we're being squished right now, and I thought about the 10 plagues that Egypt went through until the people were freed. And so for me, that made that connection there of, a lot of, we're literally going through the pandemic right now, and the hurricanes and the forest fires in the West. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that what you're saying is true, that this is going to propel us into a better age, and away from the pharaohs who owned everything and everyone, into a more open and freer society where we're valued as brothers and sisters created in the same image as you're talking about.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that, there is a long arc of conscious evolution, and that we're just seeing a tiny blip on it right now. We see a tiny, tiny blip, like one line on the huge arc of conscious evolution. And that we are, I can say this with 99%, not going to see the other side of this, any of us who are on this call. We are going to be active participants in, this 24 hours of birthing is going to be our lifetime. And so we have to also resolve ourselves to, we always think about the seventh generation. We have to resolve ourselves to doing everything that we can in our lifetime to actively engage this process, so that we are actually setting it up so that those who come after us are going to be where we most desire to be right now. Because things move slowly. the shift of consciousness. I mean, if we think about the passage of the Civil Rights Act more than 50 years ago, and we think about where we are now in regard to race relations, there are layers of shifting that are occurring. And so, you know, a lot of people are like, you know, I can't believe we're dealing with all this race stuff. I thought we dealt with that when we passed the Civil Rights Act. Passing a law does not change hearts and minds. It does not evolve consciousness. It does not cause us to see one another through the eyes of kinship. It just forces us to drive our biased beliefs under the ground. And so now what we're seeing is the light being shown into all of those dark spaces, so that all of the things that have been hidden in the shadows are now coming into the light, which is also a clue that we are now ready to turn and to face them directly and to deal with them. So we have our specific work to do right now in the midst of this period of transition. We are the transformation crew, right? We are the hinge point. And so we get to determine the direction that this shift is going to take. I mean, I think we should all get t-shirts that says transition team, right? And that we should, you know, organize and collectively be working together to really think about how do we strategically want to be this hinge point, and where is the trajectory of the leap, right? We're going to figure out wind shear, we're going to figure out distance, you know, compulsion, all of those things. We're going to work together and we're going to figure that all out. And then we're going to position our species for the leap that ensures the sustaining of life. Because our stories tell us this is the 4th time we've been here, that we have already been here 3 other times and failed to properly position ourselves for that shift, for that leap. And so we believe we're living in the 4th world, and we're trying to get to the 5th world. And if we can successfully leap into the 5th world, then we're going to have a long period of peace and growth, harmonious working together before we reach our next tension point, right? We'll get to take a big sigh and do some different types of work. But right now, this is the work of our life. This is the work of our lifetime. And so when we forget that this work is a marathon, that it's not a sprint, we get so discouraged and frustrated in the process. So when I think about those who marched in the civil rights movement, when I think about those who were part of the suffragist movement, when I think about those who were part of the Satyagraha, right? When I think about all of those who came before us, generations before us, hundreds of years before us, all the way back to the very beginning, they've all made incremental movements that have led us to this moment where we're now re-engaging lessons that were presented to us before, because we are ready to strip away another layer and see what's underneath. We are seeing what's underneath right now. And now we have to choose how we're going to engage that and how we're going to deal with that. And so I think that's really important for us to be conscious of where we are. You know, somebody asked me today, because I commented on something that they had written, you know, how do you deal with really aggressive intolerance without becoming intolerant yourself? How do we deal with all of this horrific judgment without becoming judgmental ourselves? And so I gave all kinds of, you know, really flowery advice. And then I said, you know, but we also have to remember, it cannot be tolerated. We cannot tolerate the harm that others are being subjected to. We cannot tolerate hatred being played out on the streets of our cities and towns. We cannot tolerate a rise of this movement of white nationalism. You know, those are things that we can't tolerate, right? We don't have to tolerate everything. And there are some things that are worthy of our judgment. And having that discernment and understanding that, we don't have to we don't have to drink poison in order to grow. And so, having an understanding about that, I think, is really important too, because a lot of people get stuck in one of three different scenarios. Either they think that they have to ingest every bit of poison and to somehow harmonize it with their body in order for them to evolve, or they completely engage in spiritual bypassing, where they just skip all the work and say, I believe that we're all one, so I'm not going to deal with any of this conflict. I'm just going to sit over here on my meditation cushion and I'm going to believe that we're all one. Or they do spiritual gaslighting, where they tell somebody like me, who was born into a native community and a traditional family, and they say, I understand that you were born into this reality and that you've built an identity around it, but there's a higher perspective because, you're just not spiritually evolved enough to realize that we're all one. Right? And so, don't fall into one of those three traps. Don't drink the poison. Don't bypass the work, because that's your spiritual path. Doing the work is your spiritual path. That's why we're here. And then don't get engaged in spiritual elitism and spiritual gaslighting, where you discredit somebody's experience. I was born into this body in this lifetime as this woman to do a specific task that I could not do if I was anyone other than myself. And so I want to honor the decision of my higher spirit to be here embodied in this form, and in connection and relationship to the kinship network that I have, to do the work that I was born for during this time. And I think that we have to be able to bring all of ourselves to that moment, whoever we are, whatever we were born for. Oftentimes when we introduce ourselves, and friends of mine who are Navajo, this is one of the things I always love, because we're taught to introduce ourselves in concentric circles so that our connection, like the long introduction that we're taught to do, it spirals out, right? This is who I am. And so if I tell you that whole thing of who I am and all the family lines, you'd be able to go right into my community and say, where is the person whose grandfather was from here and grandmother was from here and mother was from here and father was from here, and then send you right to my house. You'd be able to find me. And so that's why I don't give my whole introduction. No, I'm just kidding. When my friends who are Navajo talk about, they introduce themselves in their language, they say, I was born for this clan, and I was born for this clan. And that the medicine or the work of that clan actually defines their role in their family, in their tribal community, and in their life in a lot of ways. And so when we start thinking about that as a model for self-exploration, to ask ourselves the question, how many of you have ever asked yourself the question, instead of, why am I here? We've heard that one, right? That's come up a time or two over the years. But have you asked yourself, who was I born for? Who was I born for? When I think about that, I think about all of the generations of people that I'm connected to, past, present, and future. And the work of my life is done in honor and respect of those that I was born for. That's the work of this lifetime. And so I encourage you to really sit with that question in a really, really powerful way. Really be honest with yourself and ask, who was I born for? Because we like to ask what why are we here? What am I here for? But, do we ever ask who? Who am I here for? And I think that if we start asking ourselves those kinds of questions, then as we're moving forward during this time, the what and the how and the why becomes clear. Right? If we understand who we're born for, then we actually are more easily able to find the why we're here. So I want to share one other thing with you, and then I'll take another question. And you can tell me, when to stop, when you guys have had enough. We won't go any longer than another 27 minutes. So in the class that I'm teaching right now, one of the things that we talked about, which is also a segment of this is in the book, is this process of reconnecting with the Sacred Mother who lives within us. And so, and in this moment right now where the poignancy of George Floyd calling out for the mother at the moment of death is profound, because what we've been missing is that essence of the Sacred Mother within our collective societies, the one who cultivates, nurtures, protects, and nourishes life. And so when we think about the mother, like there is this poem by Clarissa Pinkola Estes that I wrote that I shared with the class. I don't have it in front of me right now, but there's a line in there where she says, my mother is my heart. My mother is my heart. And so that sacred feminine that we all have aspects of sacred feminine and sacred masculine. That sacred feminine is the intuitive heart-based wisdom. It's the internal mechanism that connects us to our highest truth and to our deepest sense of love. And so for us in our language, the word for heart is misun, and the word for grandfather is musmul. And musmul is a derivative of the word for heart, of Muslim. And the teaching that goes with that is that masculine element has gone through life and had enough experiences through life that it has softened him to the point where he now has the heart of the mother. And so he's earned that name of grandfather, Muslimal, when he reaches this age where he has had enough experiences that his heart has been softened to the point where it reflects the love of the mother. And so when we hear George Floyd crying out for the mother at this time, we recognize that what's been missing in our own hearts and in our own society is that love of the Sacred Mother. And so as we begin with that Sacred Mother within us and bring that heart-based wisdom out into the world by engaging in a balanced way with the masculine elements within us that are about manifestation out in the physical world, then we begin to harmonize the world around us collectively as we engage that process on a larger scale, if we're all starting to really do that work. But also, it is that intuitive, sacred, feminine wisdom that holds the knowledge of who we were born for. And so when we think about all of that and the connection that exists there between all of those elements and the dance and the interplay that's going on there, then we begin to understand that what we most need right now is the cultivation of the love of the Sacred Mother. And if we can begin to bring that into the work that we do, if we can begin to think about, what is my relationship with the Sacred Mother within? Do I have conversations with the Sacred Mother within? And ask the Sacred Mother to watch over me, to protect me, right? All of the prayers to, no matter what religion and what time frame you come from, all of the prayers to the Sacred Feminine have all started out in many ways of come watch over me, Mother, and protect me. Guide me, Mother, right? And so we need that mothering wisdom to guide us through this time with heart-based knowledge. so that we can begin to shift this really imbalanced way of seeing the world and being in the world that's been disconnected from the balanced nature of that masculine and feminine working together. Because, you know, the Jane Fonda said something poignant about the patriarchy, you know, stepping on the, we'll say neck. I don't know what she said, but I'm making things up now. So she said that, you know, essentially the patriarchy, you know, crushed the woman, but it also crushed the heart of the man. And when men were expected to go out and to take on all of these roles within society while severed from their own highest wisdom, the wisdom of their heart, they were being asked to walk around as wounded, half-formed beings, because we all have a balance of the sacred feminine and masculine within us if we're whole human beings who are living in balance. And so when we start thinking about that, you know, we don't need a domination conquest by the sacred feminine. What we need is a return of the heart to the masculine, to the sacred masculine. And so it's like that movie that my little granddaughter likes, the movie Moana. And she likes it because I keep showing it to her and saying, whoa, well, look at how great this is. Where Tafiti is given back her heart, and she goes from being this fearsome creature to being this gentle, loving mother. And so right now, that's where we are. We're having to give back that heart of the sacred feminine to the masculine who has been walking around without that heart-based wisdom. And it's not men. Notice I'm not saying men, because that energetic imprint can be embodied in either a male or a female or a non-binary body, right? It's not gender specific. So, okay, I'm gonna take some questions here from the chat.
Tanya Chavez, oh, I guess you see it. I have a fluffy question about where you live, because you sound like you're either from New Mexico or have lived. And like Tanya, I'm from New Mexico, so I understand where she's getting that. So.
Really? Gosh, no, I'm from Chquabanaki. We are the people of the Dawnland, the people of the Northeast. We live in the easternmost point, kind of like the Tohono O'odham, the imaginary border has cut between our people. So we're in just a small part of Maine, but all up through the Canadian Maritimes. So, but I lived in Tucson, does that count?
I was wondering, because both
Yes.
because of your connection to the Diné and also because of Rivera's son, whom I know from Occupy as well, but I know her.
Sarah is from Maine.
I know her from here.
Yeah.
I know her from like being engaged in actions with her. And
yeah, she's awesome. I love her. She's my favorite redhead. Well, I can't say that because I have a redheaded son-in-law now, and he did give me a grandbaby. So Rivera have moved down on my list. So I'll have to call her up and we'll have to talk about this. Say, okay, what do you got to offer, Rivera? We live in a commodified, capitalistic, and world. But Rivera's actually from here, and she wrote a poem after the first time she met me because the name of the poem is something like "I Thought You Were Dead," because she was raised here, and she wasn't raised to know that there were 5 tribes here in this territory, and it was really powerful and moving for her to have this realization that she was raised in such a way to not even be aware, because indigenous peoples are often invisible. People think that there are Navajo and Iroquois and Sioux and Cherokee people, right? Those are the ones that people know about. They think that all of the other Indian people just disappeared. And so we have had some really special talks about that invisibility factor. And in the Dandelion trilogy, the character Geenup is modeled after me in her books. So
I'll look for it.
Yeah.
So in New Mexico, we don't think that. We know because we're we're all integrated. With the town I grew up was on, literally is built on native land and is leased because at least they were given that bit of honor.
Yeah. Yeah, I've spent a considerable amount of time in New Mexico, but I've never lived there. So I was enchanted though. Does that count? The land of enchantment. Okay. The 4 pillars are water sovereignty, food sovereignty, energy sovereignty, and educational sovereignty. Anybody else have any more questions or comments or thoughts or ideas that you'd like to share? Please share them now.
I'd just like to just thank you for just everything you're saying. Just a month or so ago, maybe 2, I started having this experience of feeling very like there's this sense of disconnect or dissonance, cognitive dissonance or something. Because on the one hand, with all that's going on, there was this feeling coming up in me of like, I've got to do something, I've got to do something, I've got to do something. But at the same time, having this desire or inclination to go more inwards. And since then, I've had a couple of very fortunate conversations with people I respect who are saying, you know, it's not always about doing the external, you know, going out and the doing and being in the streets and stuff. I mean, that's fine. Maybe, you know, everybody's got their own thing to do, but to, you know, to respect that need to go inward and root more. Yeah. I'm doing a lot of nesting stuff. And anyway, I just appreciate having that validated, because there was this feeling, I think it goes back to kind of what you were saying in your conversation about the conquest, and that's naming it. You know, what the problem that I was having with that is that I didn't want to go out and conquer the bad guys.
Or the bad within you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I feel like I'm getting that reflected back positively to me, you know, enough ways that I'm giving myself more permission to do that self-care and be really, it's not that I'm not doing external stuff, because I am, but more like I'm being really just picky
Yeah.
about what I'm going to put my energy into. And you know, Satyagraha Institute is one of those things that I'm so grateful for this community. I'm feeling very much like the need for to be connected to community, and so I have, you know, fortunately have that locally, you know, in the small town where I live, and then also the Satyagraha Institute. So thank you for just you know, everything and reinforcing that permission.
Yeah, I think that it's really important because when we look at what's being asked of us during this time, we have a really old story that my grandmother told me when I was a little girl, and her grandmother told her when she was a little girl, about the first illness. And it's a story about the time we're living in right now, because, you know, this is the 4th time we've been here. So the story has been passed on and on and on. And so that story of the first illness, and one of my friends, Kevin Deere, who's Mohawk from a place called Ganawagi, he always says, this is the Reader's Digest version, because our stories are really, really long, right? And they take days sometimes to tell our stories. You know, some of our stories, we have to, you know, be together for a week to tell the story. And so, and then there's another elder called Teresa Sapier from Wolastoqiyik, one of the tribes within our Confederation of Tribes. And she, whenever she would tell a story, she'd say in the language, you know, this is not a story, this really happened. And so when I think about where we are right now in the story of the first illness, I think of Teresa going, this is not a story, this really happened. And I believe her, because the story of the first the children of the earth, meaning us, because we're the youngest species, had wandered away from their elders in the natural world and had forgotten who they were in connection to the rest of life. And that as a result of that forgetting, they began to do harm to the rest of life. And the animals went into council together to decide what was to be done with these, misbehaving children. And the animals had sacrificed themselves so that we could be here. All of our stories talk about the animals creating space for us, helping us, guiding us, teaching us along the way. And so they were really like loving aunties and uncles to us. And then we started doing things that were harming them and killing them. And right now we're at a place where one of my colleagues just contributed to a report that came out of the UN that we're facing right now at this time, the extinction of 1 million species. But it's really 1,000,001 because we're on that list. We're also in danger of extinction. And so the animals go into council together to determine what they're going to do about these children. And they determine that very tearfully that they're going to have to give them illness in order to teach them of their connection to the rest of life. And so they're going to give them illness that's not going to respond to their man-made medicines. In order for them to be able to heal themselves, they're going to have to find their way back to a relationship with the natural world. And so the animals give the people illness and they become very sick, and then a lot of them die, and they're struggling and they're suffering. And the trees and the plants are watching the human beings suffer. And after watching them suffer for a while, they go into council together and they say, we feel like these children have suffered enough. How are we going to help them without robbing them of the lesson that they need to learn? And so the trees and the plants decide that if the human beings will come to them humbly and ask them for help, then they will provide them with the medicine that's needed to heal them. And so the plants and the trees, they send that message out to the humans on a dream. And there's a grandmother in one of the human villages who catches that dream. And she wakes up the next day and she heads into the forest and she tells her people, I'm going to go and ask the trees and the plants if they'll help us to heal. And so she goes and she continues to ask, and she talks to all of the plants really lovingly and to the trees really lovingly. And after watching her for a period of time, engaging the sincerity of her heart, they decide that they are going to speak to her and they are going to give her the medicine that's needed to heal her and her people. And so the grandmother learns the medicine from the trees and from the plants, how to prepare it, how to harvest it in the right way through ceremony so that she's not taking too much, and then how to administer that to her people so that they get well. And she carries that knowledge back to her people, and then she tells them the story of how this came about. And the people come together in her community and they decide that they're going to move back closer to the forest, and they're going to start living once again in relationship with the rest of life. And they're going to share what they've learned with others. And those who will choose to heed that warning and to come back will be the ones who will survive going into the future. And so my grandmother told me, and we are of those people. We are the people who went back. And so right now, what we're learning is that we have to be the people who go back to pick up the lessons that we have forgotten along the way, the things that have fallen away in the midst of this illusion of separation, that we've forgotten our interrelatedness with the rest of life. And that we have to once again learn the language of the trees. They're our ancestors. When we say that the rocks are our elders, people think, that's magical and mythical thinking, right? But they don't say that to a geologist who studies the rocks. And so we understand that the rocks carry a lot of information, that the trees carry a lot of information, that the plants carry a lot of information that predates our existence on the planet. that can help guide us toward a way of living in relationship with one another that is harmonized and balanced with the rest of life. And this is where we are right now. We are learning this lesson. We're learning it collectively. And we're aware of the fact that we're learning it because we've been here before, and because this isn't a story, it really happened. And so, you know, we're finding ourselves together, and maybe we don't feel psychologically ready to turn and to face the times that we're living in. But if we can reconnect ourselves with the earth, if we can reconnect ourselves during this time of separation with one another on a deep spiritual and energetic level, if we can reconnect ourselves with the wisdom of the Sacred Mother, everything that we need to lead us into a new way of being in relationship with life will be available to us. And so I'm thankful that you gave me this opportunity to be with you tonight. I'm thankful for the time that we've shared. And I wanna thank you and wish you well on your journey as you go forward. So Kachi Wiliwan and Fasilda and Dilnavamuk, I offer this for all my relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherri. And Andre, I see that you did ask a question, and I know we have maybe just a couple more minutes, but I will leave that to you to answer. But I also just want to express my deep gratitude. I have also, I mean, the reason I got involved with the Satyagraha Institute was I felt this ongoing sort of dissonance between the work that I was doing in social activism and nonviolence. And I'm just going to echo what some other folks have said, that just when you named, you know, the conquest piece of things, it really, I think, gave language to that. So thank you from my heart. Yeah, really deeply grateful.
Thank you. And Audrey, I want to honor your question. So let's see. I think that, you know, one of the things that is really important is to recognize that we're all wounded. We've all had blinding effects of trauma. We all see the world through different masks and lenses. And if we can start really, this is the exercise that I give in the trauma workshop that I teach. So I'll try to give you a snapshot version of that that you can sit with. And then, you know, feel free to email me. You can email me at sacredinstructions@gmail.com. So the top title of my book, sacredinstructions@gmail.com. Any additional questions. And so I think that the way that you find the answer to that question is to find the most wounded aspect of yourself and learn to be in relationship with it without trying to amputate it or eliminate it or change it, to just learn how to be in the same space with it. You know, because can we be in relationship with our most wounded parts? Can we allow them to exist without any further harm, you know, without us trying to beat them into submission, without us trying to cut them off and amputate them, which is an act of violence against ourselves? Can we just hold that really wounded aspect of ourselves and be in presence with it, so that that part of ourselves that is most wounded can realize that there is a safe place for it to exist? If we can actually do that work for ourselves, then the answer to your question is found in those moments of deep connection with that most wounded aspect of ourselves. That if we can sit with the most wounded aspects of ourselves, and I've had to do this in a way where I envision myself in a room and I just come inside the room and sit right on the edge of the door with my, you know, sit down there on the floor with my head down. And that wounded aspect comes in another door on the other side of the room, and it sits down over there, and I know it's there, and it knows that I'm over here, but we never look at each other. And we had to start that way for a long time until we finally were able to get closer and closer. and just be in proximity to one another and know that it was a safe place for us to both coexist in that space together. And so when we can hold space like that without poking or prodding and trying to fix the wounded aspects of ourselves, then the wounded aspect, there is a safe space for them to exist around you. And there, the opportunities for that space holding are going to come up. The key is to not think that you have to fix somebody else. The key is for you to sit in loving acceptance of who they are in all the ways that they're wounded, right? Without allowing them to hurt you. You know, remember, we don't have to drink the poison, but we can learn to hold space for one another, to say that even the wounded aspects of you have a place where they can exist and be loved and be held in loving presence. There's this beautiful video of a dad with his small child. I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. And the dad is just holding space and being a safe, you know, keeping the child from hurting themselves and allowing them to act out all of their feelings. And then eventually the child comes and hugs them for a while, and then they throw a fit again for a little while, and they go off and they're screaming and they're kicking and they're throwing their tantrum, and the father's just making sure that they're not getting hurt. And then, you know, eventually it ends with the child coming to the father for love, right? Because he knows that even when he's acting out in the worst possible ways and he's kicking and he's screaming and he's hurt, the father is showing him there's a space, a safe space for you to exist, even when you're feeling your worst. And so if we can cultivate that within ourselves and allow for the most wounded aspects of ourselves to have a safe space where they can exist, then we're opening that creative, energetic space, that loving energetic space for that to be called into us. And you know, just remember those 3 rules. You don't drink the poison, you don't spiritual bypass, and you don't spiritual gaslight. You don't do those things to yourself either. And so, but you can hold loving space for the wounds and let them exist. Let them exist without feeling like it's your job to fix them. So that's my advice on that. I hope that's helpful, Audrey. So, thank you.
Thank you again, Sherri, so much. And thank you everyone for your time, for being here. All of these sessions continue to build on each other. So looking forward to Inner Life tomorrow morning for those who are able to make it. And I hope all goes well for you, Sherri. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And if you want to, you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And I will be posting pictures of the place as things are developing in regard to vision. We're going to try not to develop the land very much, but just to find ways to live in harmony with it. But I'll post pictures of it. So on Facebook, it's facebook.com/sacred instructions. And so I'll keep you updated on the progress that we're making in the community as we're figuring out how to do all these things that I talk about, you know, in real time. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherri.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. See you in the morning.
Bye.